Hello, everyone. Welcome to Global Esports Executive Summit 2021. I'm David Shin, working as an international relations specialist and business development manager at Korea Esports Association. It is my immense pleasure being a part of this great discussion. I used to work in the field of traditional sports for more than 4 years, and now I'm pursuing my goal in the field of esports. So, talking about the crossover between the traditional sports and esports is such an exciting opportunity to me. I look forward to diving into more detailed discussion today. I'm privileged and honored to have an opportunity to be a moderator of a discussion among the professionals with extensive experience and knowledge. I'm sure that today's discussion will provide you with a great insight and better understanding of the contemporary crossover. Now, let me introduce our proud panelists to you. First up, we have Mr. Rodrigo Quesada, Business Development Director at CEDAR Group. Hi, Rodrigo.
Everyone, nice to meet you. Thank you. Thank you for having me, David. Hi.
Next up, we have Mr. Ravneet Gill, the founder of CEO of New Horizons Alliance. Hello, Mr. Gill.
Hello, and an absolute pleasure to be part of this panel. Thank you for having me here.
Next up, we have Mr. Alex Inglot, Commissioner of ESL Pro League. Hi, Alex.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate GEES inviting me.
We also have Mr. Zhang, CEO of Talon Esports. Hi, Sean.
Hey guys, pleasure to be here today.
Last but not least, we have a very special guest, Mr. Vlad Marinescu, the president of IESF, joining us today. Hi, Vlad.
Good morning again. Hello, David.
Please give them a warm round of applause. Now, let us dive into the discussion. My first question goes to Alex and Vlad. How would you describe contemporary crossover? Let's go with Alex first.
Yeah, I think in the last 5-10 years, we've seen a real appetite and a real curiosity from a lot of traditional sports and federations and leagues and clubs and other stakeholders to see how they can explore and collaborate with the esports opportunity. And broadly speaking, there may be obviously other variations, but I think there are two ways that we see the crossover begin to materialize. I think the first way is where you see traditional sports look at the existing esport ecosystem and the existing games, the existing titles, the existing ecosystem, and thinks, how can we work with what already exists, with what already is flourishing? How can we bring some of that shine, some of that buzz, some of that learnings backstage into our existing sports? The other opportunity, I think, is what I would call traditional sports digitizing their existing sport. So that's where they see an opportunity. Let's take an example, Formula One, which is an existing sport, and it thinks, I want to create a digital version of my sport, a esports version of my existing sport, Formula One motor racing, and I want to nourish and build that into a formidable esport, and with all of the opportunities that that brings in terms of fan engagement, demographics, things like that. So I think that, I'm sure there are other ways, but really for me, the main breakdown is traditional sports looking at the existing esports ecosystem, or traditional sports creating and developing their own digital version of their sport. That's how I would kind of start the breakdown.
All right, thank you very much. How about you, Vlad? What do you think?
I think Alex said it very well. I know that there are, from all of the sports from around the world, there are certain sports that are very esports friendly, and it's very easy to do the pure sport digitization. As Alex mentioned, Sims racing, for example, rowing, cycling, all the sports where you have equipment that can simulate that exact movement for that exact result. I know that many international federations want to enter the space. It's target oriented. They want to enter the space in order to connect with and to promote their sport to a younger demographic, to the youth, in order to convert them to one day being more interested to watch that sport on TV or on other platforms. And some of them even to try that sport out once, and maybe even some of them even to become professionals in that sport. So many international federations at the moment, because of the way the sport is, are able to make pure sport digitization. But I can tell you that lots of sports at the moment, and I get calls about this all the time because I used to be in that world. I used to be Director General of Sport Accord, of the Global Association of International Sports Federations. They all want to be in the space. They're all trying to make a game, whether it be a mobile game, whether it be communicating with big publishers and finding out how to give to their community an esport. And the final point I just want to add is that we need to know that there are, of course, huge communities of esports and gamers, enthusiasts, but at the same time of all the traditional sports, you have huge communities. And I think that as time moves on, as technology develops, as we become more modernized and more digitized as a society, we're going to see more and more inclusion, and not just inclusion, but demand from those sporting communities to have some version of their esport. That way they can play their particular sport they love so much on the way to work in the morning on their phones.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the analysis, Vlad and Alex. I believe Sean can give us some exemplary cases of contemporary crossover. Sean, I recently read a very interesting article about Talon Esports, partnering up with Ms. Stephanie Rice and Mr. Matthew Delivadova and Mr. Bruce Kiter. They are traditional sports stars, and it was very interesting to see them finding potentials of esports through Talon Esports. I've been following your journey, including PSG partnership. Can you introduce some of the major examples or achievements to us?
Yeah, sure. I think on the PSG side, I'll touch upon that first because I think that's probably the most relevant for us. So, we partnered together with PSG about, I think, 18 months ago for the League of Legends team. And their philosophy and thinking for coming to us and also working out of Asia is to really continue to develop the PSG brand throughout the region. Obviously, they are one of the world's largest football teams and, known globally. And obviously, recent signing of Messi has even further accelerated that. But they do face, I guess, maybe some issues around Asia in regards to viewership, right? If you look at the most popular leagues that are watched here in Asia, most likely is the Premier League, right? It's the number one. The English Premier League is the most watched league. And so another interesting angle that they have approached in regards to really developing the PSG brand is to push into esports. And you've seen them develop teams throughout the region. So you look at, LGD, PSG in mainland China for Dota 2. They're working with us directly within League of Legends, within the PCS, so PSG Talent. You also see them create teams in Thailand with ROV, which is a really popular mobile game within that region. And then also in Singapore, I think they still have a Brawl Stars team there as well, right? And it's all part of a global strategy for them to really continue to develop and execute that brand to a new, younger demographic and audience, which esports represents, right? So I think it's a really smart strategy. It's a win-win for both cases because it helps them build their brand, but also helps a lot of these teams elevate and also increase our audiences to a new group of fans, which are PSG football fans potentially. And so I think there's a lot of things that we work together on them, whether it be on the commercial side, the marketing, performance management, as well as commercial terms. But overall, I think it's a really strong partnership that we've been able to develop and really has helped us elevate and accelerate our growth, at the same time help support them in the region on building that PSG talent brand and enforcing it within sort of the APAC region. For Steph and Delhi, who have joined us recently, one of the things that we're really pushing within our organization is around performance management. And on performance management, one thing which we think can be improved within the esports space is the physical training and how clubs are run. And so I think working with brands like PSG, working with like Steph and Delhi, why it's so important for us is that we can learn from the best, right? PSG is one of the most successful football clubs in the world. We might be heading there to Paris to do an info session with them later this year. For Stephen Delhi as well, being NBA champions, Olympic gold medalists as well, they know what it takes to become world-class athletes, right? And the work that needs to be put in to do that. And for us to learn from them is really important because I think traditional sports has been around for a very, very long time. Esports is still relatively new. And for us to take lessons from everything that they've gone through in their careers is really beneficial for us because it just helps us elevate our standards when it comes to managing players and also, looking at developing talent, retaining talent, building talent, and kind of creating a platform that allows our players to be the best they are. And we honestly believe healthy mind, healthy body really helps and translates onto the esports field because a lot of the games that we play is very reaction based. And, you do play long sets as well. So being physically fit is a huge benefit on the esports field as well.
That is very exciting indeed. Then why do you think such crossover has been taking place?
Yeah, I think for the PSG side of things, it really is about audience growth and pushing into new regions. Not saying that they don't have fans in the region. Obviously, PSG has a really strong presence globally, but maybe with particular youth audiences, then this represents a new opportunity to expand those audiences even further and continue to build the brand, right? I think football, obviously League One is, as I mentioned before, is perhaps not the most popular league here in Asia. Obviously the EPL does dominate most of the viewership from what I understand, but I guess this is another way in which they can explore and continue to develop and build that fan base. Of course, they have the Champions League, which is very well watched here in Asia, but also from a time zone perspective, it's always not the most convenient, right? You're watching the Champions League here in APAC around 3, 4, 5 a.m. in the morning. And so having some alternatives around building the brand, building awareness, and potentially building fans within the esports and then transferring it over to traditional sports, I think that is kind of their thinking around that. And I think it's a smart strategy simply because of the fact that, they obviously are in France and playing in League One, and being able to continually expand that audience into that is really important. You've seen a ton of that happen here in Asia as well. Valencia Football Club is another one that has done a lot of work in Thailand with ROV to continue to expand their audience outside of just say the La Liga audiences that they have. And we're seeing more and more traditional teams from Europe and the US start to look at Asia as they continue to build the fan base here. I think from an esports perspective, the key thing is, 50 to 60% of the esports audience comes from our region, and to be able to capture some of that is really important in order to expand that audience even further and for these brands. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Anyone would like to add on to that?
If I could, thank you. I think Sean brings up a really interesting point, and audience is, as you always, kind of quite close to the front of the mind of whoever engineers these crossovers. But I think what's fascinating to me when I look at crossovers is how, while all the ingredients are always in the crossover, there always seems to be a slightly different focus depending on the different organization. I had the opportunity to speak actually in New York yesterday to Nicole, who's the CEO of Evil Geniuses, and she was talking very similarly to what Sean was talking about, where their crossover and their tie-up with Wolverhampton Wanderers is linked to the fact that the owners of Wolverhampton are a strong Chinese brand, Fosun, strong Chinese company, and where EG were very strong in North America, Wolverhampton were building a very strong presence in Asia. There was an opportunity to really cross over in terms of demographics and identifying those markets and really exploring those markets with a partner that was already doing, walking the walk. So you get those opportunities where they're very geographic focused. Then you see other tie-ups where another interesting example, which would seem to be similar, Man City tie-up with FaZe Clan. Again, football club in Europe meets American brand, but there's a very different primary focus. There's obviously a lot of synergies, all of the things that Sean mentioned, but there the focus is much more on content, on brand, on merchandise, it's more of a kind of brands are judged by the company they keep. And so the idea is FaZe is building itself to be like the preeminent brand in front of house when it comes to the esport and gaming and streaming landscape. And they wanted to kind of really show that they're on a parallel by partnering up with a very big, recognized, innovative, dynamic brand like Manchester City. So there's a slightly different focus. So depends really. What I find fascinating is that, as I said, the mixture of audience, content, demographics, performance learning. So complexity, another good example. They partnered with Dallas Cowboys. Their focus was much more around performance. They wanted to build a performance center, which they set up in Dallas in alliance with the Dallas Cowboys, right on the site of the Dallas Cowboys headquarters. And they really wanted to use that opportunity. Did it cover everything? Absolutely, it covered everything, including branding, including merchandise. But the focus seemed to me to be much more, when I spoke to Jason, who heads up the complexity team, let's really professionalize our performance, our administration, our back of house. So it really, each tie-up is very unique in terms of where it decides to really focus on the benefits and where it really sees the most important ingredient in the tie-up. So each crossover, and I'm sure everyone will speak to this, has a slightly different dynamic, has a slightly different primary flavor.
I could see that such crossover is very active and is something inevitable already. Thank you. Then let us shift the gear and talk about whether such effort on crossover is something temporary. So Rodrigo, my next question goes to you. Do you think today's crossover is sustainable?
Thank you very much. I believe we will see this happening much more often than we have been seeing it in the present. And obviously, it's not going to be only a crossover within sports. I think esports it's an industry that has been taking a lot of attention lately, and it's obviously very interesting because it's dominating the young audiences. So we are going to see, I think, a lot of esports getting involved with sports and other industries as well. And I really like the example that Alex was just mentioning before, because we will see not only the crossover when it comes to the sports or the competition, but obviously we get to see a lot of sustainability when it comes to understanding how to get to a connection with the fan, what about entertaining that fan. And because I see a lot of sports getting to learn from the esports teams also, how did they bring on board not only players, but also streamers, casters, and people that get to entertain the fan, not only to see the competitions. I would truly believe that fans want to see the crossover when it makes sense, and also brands and a lot of business companies are taking. I see a lot of business companies that are media companies getting involved with sports and esports, and it's interesting to see that how it's gonna be also with executives getting to merge their business opportunities also.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Ravneet? Asia is a huge market with tons of opportunities of crossover between sports and esports. What do you think? Do you think such crossover can be sustainable?
Yes, first and foremost, thank you. Look, I think when we talk about sustainability in terms of crossover, there are a couple of points that we need to be mindful about. First and foremost, when you talk about traditional sport and you talk about any traditional sport worldwide which is exceedingly successful, I think one of the pillars of that success is the commercialization of that sport. Whether it's sponsors, advertisers, broadcasters, all of them, they've built a very successful ecosystem, built very strong partnerships. Typically, whether it's the broadcasters, sponsors, advertisers, want to talk to a younger audience simply because they are the ones who are more aspirational, more acquisitive. And the fact is that if you look at the average age of the audience in esport, it's very, very young. I mean, it's absolutely the sweet spot that you want to typically address. So that is number one. I think the second point effectively again is that when we talk about esport, and let's look at it in the broader context of gamification, it's not just impacting sport per se. I mean, the world is getting increasingly digitalized. And you will see that gamification will play a very big role in education. It'll play a very big role in corporate learning and development. So basically, it's becoming more all-pervasive in terms of our various facets of our life. Two other elements that I'd like to touch upon. One is, if you look at traditional sport, it still does have certain barriers, in terms of at least the emerging markets. Playing infrastructure, facilities, open spaces, equipment, etc. That remains a challenge. And to that extent, esport in some ways takes that away, makes it a lot more participative, makes it a lot more democratic, and to that extent, people will continue to gravitate more and more towards that. The final point that I'd make with respect to this is that when we talk about gaming, everybody talks about the screen time, but a very big element of that also is the whole community building, the social aspect of that. If we look at traditional sport historically, and we can look at it across sport, including something like soccer, which is which has such a broad global appeal, we haven't been able to build global communities around that. And when we have seen societies, we have seen economies globalize, why has that not happened with sport per se? And again, if you look at esport vis-a-vis, let's say, traditional sport, esport gives you that opportunity as well in terms of building global communities, because I mean, gamers have a language of their own, they have a culture of their own, semantics of, which is very, specific to them. So I think if we look at it from the point of view of all these factors, the crossover will only continue to, gain pace. It'll continue to intensify. It most certainly is, sustainable. And the final point I'll make in this respect is that wherever there is a crossover, wherever there are partnerships that are getting built, of this nature, and Alex, alluded to that. Typically, the people who you use as ambassadors, people that you use as champions, are actually figures from traditional sport. It is to be able to then, superimpose in the minds of people that, the divide that exists between the traditional sport or that particular sport vis-a-vis the esports side of it, is more an issue about optics. The fact that a champion traditional sports person is talking about the crossover also then provides a little more credibility to that whole direction of travel, in terms of the crossover being something which is a natural progression and which is something which is sustainable. So I definitely see this being a very major theme globally, but more so I think within let's say emerging markets within Asia, which typically has younger populations, populations which are technologically a little more adept, take to technology a little more intuitively. That's what I meant. So yes, I definitely see this as a sustainable trend and a trend that will intensify as we go forward.
Thank you.
If I can just add to that, I think Ravneet brings up some very good points. And definitely one of the biggest objectives is to find that sustainability, because all the stakeholders involved have a responsibility to ensure sustainable evolution of this activity, of this crossover, where all parties that are involved, that are adding benefit, are receiving a benefit back from their activity. And the benefit, of course, is multi-pronged. So the benefit for a sponsor is more eyeballs, more visibility, goodwill towards their brand, actual direct sales. I think that companies having the insights and the feedback when their sponsors and partners with esports are at such an advanced level that traditional sports need to start providing those benefits and those attributes during their traditional sporting events. Proper fan engagement, bringing the youth in, giving a direct reference of what eyeballs are watching, from where and how. And what I'd like to add to that is that point of breaking borders. Esports has no borders. Esports is breaking borders while people are sitting at home in the comfort of their home, in terms of not professional gaming at the highest level, but for gaming in general. And in esports, we break those borders. So it means that we're not bound anymore by geography, by physical distances. We're able to communicate across cultures, across demographics, across continents, with people that have a similar interest, increasing friendship, promoting viewership, and generating a benefit for all the people that are playing, for all the brands that are involved, for the event organizers, and for the community as a whole.
Thank you, Vlad. Okay. All of you are saying that such trend is sustainable. Then let me throw a fundamental question then. Do we actually need the crossover? What do you think, Sean?
Hard question, but I think it's necessary. I think it helps legitimize the space, and obviously it helps sort of obviously build and cross over these audiences together. Overall, my view is, having worked with PSG, it has really helped us a lot to learn and grow as an esports organization. The key thing with esports, there is no playbook around what is right and wrong. Alex mentioned around all these different brands. So you look at a Clan FaZe versus an EG versus a 100 Thieves versus a Team Liquid versus a Cloud9. Each of these have their own unique way in which they run their esports club. Some are centered more around content. Some are centered more around performance. But I think there's still a lot to learn for this esports space. And it's still so new. And there's still so many different ways which are still left unexplored that we should leverage as much as we can to kind of learn and grow and explore. And even if you look at, for example, League of Legends, the way they've franchised various leagues, including the LPL, the LCK, the LEC, and the LCS, I mean, that's a model that's learnt from traditional sport in the US, right? Like the NBA, the NHL, the Major League Baseball. These are all franchise leagues. So for me, I think there's a lot of learning to be done within the esports space, and that learning can be accelerated a lot faster working with traditional sports clubs who've been around for decades, if not hundreds of years, and who have learnt how to run the ropes of running a club, maintaining talent, building a brand, engaging with audiences, and taking those lessons and applying them to esports. So for me, I think it's really important, just from a knowledge point of view, and also from the maturity of the esports space on creating sustainable ecosystems, right? Because we touched upon that before. You look at a lot of traditional sports, they've been able to grow value significantly. And I think in esports, that's something that we need to learn to do as well. So overall, I would say, yeah, I think it's necessary. And I think it's a huge plus. And for us, I think it's super exciting to learn and grow with these major brands and allow us to kind of speed up our growth and avoid those mistakes that might happen if we didn't have that guidance or that knowledge.
Maybe to add to that also, I think that the traditional sports are learning from what esports are doing, because the talent and the youth and the use of the technology to exchange and to add a benefit to the viewership and to the sponsors is something that traditional sports are getting a crash course in by being involved in esports. So I completely agree that we're learning a lot from the traditional sports, but it's multi-directional.
Yep.
They also can learn a lot from us. So instead of crossover, I'd say more it's of a cross collaboration or a cross education between the different stakeholders as traditional sports enter the esports market. We learn from them and they learn from us.
Yeah, I think Vlad is spot on, and he's in a similar position to me, having come from a traditional sports. And I mean, I live and breathe that synergy today. I sit on the board of the ATP, the traditional men's tennis tour. I'm one day I'm in board meetings for the ATP. The next day I'm in board meetings for the ESL Pro League, and it's, as Vlad says, there are synergies both ways. No one's doing any charity work here. No one's doing, this doesn't work if it's one-sided or one-directional. There has to be value and objectives being achieved either side. And, I don't want to generalize because every esport is in different, every stakeholder is in different areas, but you can see clear opportunities around content, merchandise, drops, digitalization, how to kind of speak really the language of young fans, which we see that is kind of considered to be the bread and butter of esports and esports stakeholders. Again, when I speak to EG, they talk a lot about how Wolves lean on them to kind of help create content concepts, ideas. What is the way to really get those retweets, those follows, those subscription on Twitch, those kind of things. The Australian Open had the Fortnite on their site in January in 2020, and it was an incredible opportunity for them to have the young people come in, be engaged. The Australian Open kind of positions itself very much as a festival, so it's not just tennis, it's kind of centered around tennis, but there's music, there's esports, and for them it was a critical piece to kind of how do we make sure that those kids either come in, or once they're in, if they're not necessarily engaging 100% with tennis, we don't want them to leave the site. We want them to stay on the site. We want them to enjoy the experience. Maybe that can involve a few hours of Fortnite, engaging with some streamers who have come on site, maybe engaging with the tournament, engaging with a few drops that Twitch have collaborated with them on. But equally then on the other side, as Vlad alludes to, and he'll know this better than most, there's some fantastic benefits from partnering with an organization or a league or an individual even, who has the understanding of how governance works, how regulatory landscapes look, how to structure deals, contractual best practice. So there's all kinds of opportunities, and that's why you see not just kind of hype, what I would call hype collaborations. You see Kyle, I've forgotten his name, the Arizona Cardinals quarterback who is part of the FaZe Clan team, along with Bronny James, the son of LeBron James. There's a lot of hype there. You're tapping into the fandom that exists in basketball and NFL in America and bringing the FaZe Clan brand front and center to these fans, to these new fans. But you've also got that back end, behind the curtain expertise and learnings that are so critical to taking frankly, both traditional sports stakeholders and esports stakeholders to the next level.
Thank you, Alex. Then, Rodrigo, what do we need to do in order to further secure the sustainability of this necessary crossover?
I would say that the discussion is going to be about if we stay with the crossover or if we get into a merger. Because I would say that, for example, getting back to the case of PSG and Talon, it's a branding issue that is going to happen. Start having discussion. I think who is going to be if when the crossovers is going to be each one keeping their brand and their league, and if it's going to be an independent crossover, but brands are going to be standing independent or brands are going to be merged into one. And it's interesting to see nowadays you see PSG, Talon, for example, being like a merger of brands, but they are still keeping their independence in case that anything happens. I would say that it's going to be interesting to see if the crossover it's going to be around the brand or if it's going to be all around the other areas like team, performance, brand, sponsors, merging content, like creating an entertainment experience. I would like to see in the future, and I would really like to maybe afterwards to discuss a little bit about what is going to happen with regards to branding. That it's a critical thing that is going to happen in the future.
Right,
I think maybe, David, one thing to add to that is just that in esports, we talked about breaking borders, which is something we can do, and we do it already, but also it's not only sports specific. Lots of different sports in esports, athletes who are stars and celebrities of certain traditional sports really enjoy gaming as well. In Tokyo, I was sitting with the 60 kilogram Olympic champion just the day after he got the Olympic medal, specifically Takato, the 60 kilogram Olympic champion from Japan. And he was telling me that he's an avid player of Fortnite, that he loves to play it in his free time. He does judo and he does esports, and he's quite good at it. So we're going to, I think, also see the evolution of not just a brand like PSG, which we know has a lot more activity than just football. Inside of their club, they do water polo, they do all kinds of other sports. We're going to see not only a crossover from traditional sports to electronic sports, but also a crossover between sports, certain traditional sports with certain other esports, where celebrities, influencers, and stars are able to attract a community of traditional sports enthusiasts, followers, and fans to particular esports and particular games.
Then my next question would be, can anyone identify any traditional sports markets that have not yet developed on esports relationships? Or are there traditional sports platforms with exceptionally high growth potential with respect to esports partnership? Anyone?
I can just give one quick one while everyone thinks about a particular one. Particularly with judo. Judo was my first sport. I started in judo in 2003. I still have the pleasure to be in the International Judo Federation as Director General today. And we built in Minecraft, we built the entire Budokan Stadium, which was the home of judo during the Olympic Games in 1964, built for the 1964 Games, and was now also the venue of judo at the Tokyo Olympic Games just this past month. Having the ability to gamify, to introduce and educate an esports youth community to the Budokan, to the values of sport, was a very simple way to not make a game for the sport, but rather to bring the community together. We've had an amazing uproar of both youth that have nothing to do with judo and the judo community who all go inside Minecraft to play the game and be in that world and discover the Budokan. Besides that, many sports are entering the market at the moment, just a matter of development and time, but we're going to see that in the future continuing and growing, in my opinion.
What do you think, Ravneet? I want to hear your opinion on this.
Yeah, I think what Vlad said, I tend to agree with that. But let me give you the example of a sport which is obviously very popular in India, Asia, and now growing in popularity. In fact, in terms of audiences, second only to soccer now, which is cricket. And if you look at cricket, despite the audiences that it enjoys, it hasn't really been, gamified in some big sense, and we haven't started to see the overt crossover with respect to esports. So what we've seen, for instance, is a lot of it happening in terms of fantasy sport, and it's become very popular. Lots of followers. These companies have large valuations, but have we really seen a crossover in the case of cricket? The answer to that is no. But then it's very interesting. This evolution can take many different forms. So if I look at the sport per se, there are three different versions of the sport which are all officially recognized, and on the basis of which there's a World Cup played for each one of those three versions. So it's not that there are two which are officially sanctioned and the third which is just a recreational thing which is played at a club level. These are three different streams of the sport, quite different one from the other, and which are then played at a global level. And like I said, that there are world championships, World Cups that are played around that. The thing really is that to the point that will there be a sport which will eventually not start to experience that crossover? My view is I don't think that happens, and the reason for that, quite simply, is that every year, for instance, there's a survey that PricewaterhouseCoopers does with the stakeholders of traditional sport to ask them in terms of what are their views with regard to the future direction of travel of sport per se, or the particular discipline that they represent. And in the 2020 survey, the topic of discussion really was that how do you see e-sport influencing your sport? That could be in terms of bringing in newer fans, broadening the appeal of the sport, building new commercial relationships, adding revenue streams to the traditional sport. And it was just incredible to see that overwhelming majority of the stakeholders of these traditional sport felt, and I'm talking about 70 and 80% respondents had to say that look, esport will play a very big role with respect to each one of those areas that I talked about, whether it was the commercialization, new partnerships, newer audiences, broadening the appeal of that sport. So I think it's inevitable, and I think the important part here is that we don't see this as something which represent conflict or represent confrontation. I don't think that's what it is at all. I think it's a natural progression. We are seeking out younger audiences. If you look at Gen Z is a gaming generation, and if you want to engage them, then we need to speak to them in a language that they relate to. So it happened to many of us that when we started to see that our children had different ways of communicating vis-a-vis how we communicate, and if you wanted to keep a channel of communication open with them, then you had to go to the platform that they used. And I think what we are seeing with respect to crossover is very similar. And I just think that the world needs to be a little more accepting, a little more receptive to this than to think of this in terms of negative stereotypes. Everybody talks about the fact that this can lead to addiction and the screen time that kids end up spending. The point is, this is not just passive viewing. Esports, at the end of the day, is very participative. And to that extent, you need to differentiate it from just watching OTT content. The other thing is, one of the participants talked about the fact that this whole crossover will influence not just sport and esport and traditional sport, but other things which constitute consumer screen time, whether it's music, whether it's entertainment, whether it's the OTT platform. And you are seeing that there's a great correlation between music and esport already that is beginning to emerge. So I think all of this will come together. What that will do effectively is it will deepen the fan base, it will broaden the appeal, it will bring in more commercial partners in terms of viewers, broadcasters, sponsors, advertisers, which becomes such an important tool for globalizing the appeal of sport, and keep bringing more and more people into the fold of sport, which I think is really one of the big objectives that everybody who deems himself or herself to be a stakeholder of sport should be looking at. So Vlad talked about the fact that esport is bringing down borders, which is absolutely right. But it's not just borders. I think it's also stripping down a lot of other filters which prevent people from, playing active sports. Sometimes the reasons could be physical. Sometimes the reasons could be that, the facilities or the equipment, etc., is not available. Sometimes, you don't have enough friends around you. But all those barriers are now getting stripped down. So I think the progression is natural. It needs to be, looked at in a more pragmatic, rational fashion. And I think overall it will benefit both esport and traditional sport.
Thank you. I wanted to, give you some follow-up questions. I really wanted to know more about that. But we are getting close to the finish time, so I'll throw my last question. My last question is, where do you think this crossover should be headed for? Alex?
Look, I think Rodrigo alluded to it in one of his earlier questions. I think the question is how to deepen the crossover, and the deepening the crossover really kind of can cover a whole bunch of areas. We could look at rights as a very standalone area. How do we make sure that we can get all the rights together to make sure that people who participate in the digital version of a sport get that full experience? If you're missing the rights, so I'll give you an example from tennis. In tennis, where we have a lot of independent contractor athletes, it's difficult to coalesce all of the rights from those individuals to create a game where, whether you want to play as Roger Federer, Ilie Nastase, Boris Becker, Serena Williams, and you want to play in Wimbledon, or you want to play in the US Open, you need to find a game that has the ability to bring all those rights together. So the more disparate the original traditional sports stakeholder field is, the more difficult it has to have that complete experience. So I think the aggregating the rights matrix in sports where that is not necessarily the natural state of play is an interesting challenge. I think the other question is about immersiveness. So I think you asked earlier which sport is going to struggle. You might argue, the first thing that came into my head, maybe a bit stupid, was FINA sports, so swimming. I mean, maybe water polo and swimming is difficult to emulate in a digital version. Maybe Vlad will tell me I'm wrong and they already have a game. But I think what we're going to see with technology is the much more immersive experience. So we've got a lot of games today, which I think Vlad started with this, which is based around the controller or the keyboard. And that's a very rich experience. But I think as technology evolves, you're going to see people who want to have almost the physical experience of something akin to playing basketball, or something akin to rowing, or something akin to even the existing esports, whether it's League of Legends. You want something much more akin to that experience. So it's not just buttons on a keyboard, but it's you're feeling things on a sensor on your body, you're seeing things through a VR headset. So I think as that develops, I think that actually plays into the crossover, at least experientially, because you want that experience. I mean, I can create a game about water polo on a keyboard, but if I can find a way, maybe I'm looking 20, 30, 40 years in the future, that I can actually almost feel like I'm in a swimming pool when I'm playing the digital version of water polo, that's a much richer experience. And we're going to see that from the games that sound ridiculous today to the not so ridiculous. So I think all of these games are going to look to find the technology partnership and the technology capabilities to really enrich that experience as much as humanly possible. So I think those are kind of areas where those opportunities, at least from an experiential point of view, we can really enrich the experience. But then also, I think we've touched on this numerous times, is the back end. How do we just continue to learn from each other? Technology will advance. Who's going to be better at it? Maybe esports in some ways, but maybe traditional sports will be better in other ways as they deal with the regulations to deal with things. So there will be always opportunities for that synergy. I don't see a world in which one sport or one esports moves away so far that it no longer needs the other in almost any shape or form. There will always be learnings. And I think while that continues to be the case, we have that kind of fantastic opportunity to really kind of blend all the best practices back end between esports and sports, which I think we're all keen to see.
All right, thank you. So as discussed, crossover between traditional sports and esports is an inevitable contemporary trend in the industry. But what's really important is good understanding of both industries and paying respect to each industry's achievement. We believe that successful crossover will bring great synergy to both traditional sports and esports. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and thank you again for your time and participation. Now, let us move on to the Q&A session. During the discussion, our viewers threw some interesting questions. So first question is, in my sight, traditional sports want to under control esports in traditional territory, especially sports genre games. So I think IOC selected traditional federation in Olympic virtual series instead of Esports Federation. So the question is, crossover with traditionals as important as protect the territory of esports? Anyone would like to answer?
It's a very rich question that involves a lot of little questions inside. Just to make one comment on Alex's intervention, completely agree 100%. The technology is going to expand. The ability of the technology to give an experience will result in the percentage of conversion between gamepad players and experience wanters or feelers or demands. About the choice to choose the traditional sports, it's because the International Olympic Committee is working with those international federations. They are their partners. They are promoting that the international federations are getting involved in the space, and they're trying to create exposure for that. That being said, there needs to be a place also for the esports that are non-sport genre specific, and the activity of competing in a digital world is a sport. This was the question that I think everyone asked before. That's something that needs to be mentioned. Esports is a sport. It takes dedication, it takes hard work, it takes talent, it takes experience, it takes finance, and it creates a benefit. So I think definitely moving forward, that collaboration will be enforced, will be growing, and it can only be done with mutual respect and friendship.
Thank you very much, Vlad. So the second question is the rapid evolution of esports with an environment that can change so much from one year to the next as games come and go and trends change. Is that an advantage or disadvantage for a spectator sport when compared to a comparatively a very stable traditional sports environment?
I can take that, at least to start with. I think that it depends. I think that different audiences adapt to their games. So let's look at different esports. Look at CS:GO, which is my esport. CS:GO is quite a stable esport. There's not a huge amount of change in it. It's occasionally maps come in and out, but really the gameplay experience is focused on, we want to make sure that you excel technically. And so therefore we don't have an interest in kind of jumbling things up too often, because otherwise that destabilizes the player base. And so I think, but would you argue that that makes it stale? I don't think so. I think, the people that love CSGO love that. They love that it's just a pure test of a technical and strategic ability that isn't upended by constant kind of changes of landscape, changes of weaponry, changes of experience, which kind of destabilize talent and destabilize performance. But however, on the other side, you've got games like League of Legends where they keep introducing new heroes. And so it really requires the elite players and also the amateur players to keep thinking and rethinking, going, wait, hold on, which player do I want to play? And if I go against this new character, this new hero, is that a problem? Am I going to win or am I going to lose? Or how do I play with this person? So it's horses for courses, to be honest. It depends. And I think some people who are in a stable game love that stability, and people who are in games that evolve quickly love that evolution, love that requirement to be nimble, to keep adapting. So, and I think audiences follow that. Audiences love that about the sports that they kind of invest in terms of time and energy and affinity and love and passion. So I don't think there's one size fits all. I think there are esports that evolve, there are esports that don't evolve, and we always assume that evolution is a good thing, and I think in many ways it is, but it doesn't always have to be in every facet of the game. I think we see fans enjoy the experience, whether it's the same game that it was 3 years ago, or it's a completely different one.
How about you?
To add to Alex, was
Yeah,
absolutely correct with everything he said. I think also it depends on the gamer themselves and at the level at which they're playing. And it's very similar to traditional sports. So I love to do fighting sports, but I'll also play football with my friends once a week. And I'll also play some basketball when the occasion permits itself. Same in esports. I think that people who are gamers at the lower professional level tend to enjoy new games and new experiences and new editions of games they have. And the fundamental skills that they develop and they learn are adaptable from game to game. While completely agreeing with what Alex said about the specialized and lovers, and I'm also a CSGO guy. Actually, mine was more of a Half-Life module of Counter-Strike since I'm a little bit older. But definitely, I think that the environment is changing. There are games coming out all the time and evolving according to the demand of the market. And I think that not only in the player's side of participating, but also in the spectator's side, we're going to have a lot of the base that are interested to watch different types of games because they're enthusiasts, they play, they enjoy. But at the same time, also people that are diehard lovers of one particular game and don't ever want it to change, like CSGO, which was a great example.
All right, if the time allows, I want to hear from Sean about question number 2. Sean, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just to answer specifically about the question, I think, esports will have each game has its own community that has been built out over, so many years, right? And that will come and go, and some games will be stronger, some games will be weaker at certain times. But then there is, when we see it, there's 5 stable global games that you see, right? Like League, Dota, Overwatch to a certain extent now, and then CSGO. There's always these top esports that are around, and they will continue to develop, and they're stable. But what I think is a little bit different, let's say, from our region in Southeast Asia, is that if you look at all the different markets, each game has its own title that is really, really popular, right? So if you look at a place like Thailand, most people probably don't know that Arena of Valor is the most popular title there, right? Like its viewership dwarfs any other esports there, and it's probably on par with platforms like the LEC and the LCS, but they may not know about it because domestically that's what the publishers had a lot of success in building the community and that fan base, and therefore that game's really popular. You just move across a few blocks or countries in Southeast Asia, and you go to Indonesia, and you have a game called Mobile Legends Bang Bang on the mobile side, which is crazy popular there. The viewership numbers, maybe in certain cases, during the grand finals, even equivalent to World's English broadcast, right? So they had that much viewership there. And so there is a lot of different games, and different markets and different regions will have different interests in different types of esports titles. But I think that's totally fine because each community has been built differently. Every market has different interests in particular games or platforms or consoles. If you look at Southeast Asia, console gaming, PC gaming is not dominant. Mobile gaming is dominant because everyone can have a handset, and the infrastructure for internet, for mobile internet is probably better than particularly landlines. And so it does change. And so I think the key thing within esports is that per market, per region, the platform, the games are all different. And that's part of sort of the ecosystem that we run. As an esports organization, our job is to stay abreast of all the trends that are popular. So, what are the top games within our region that we can build a fan base around? And then we will pivot because there's certain games will become popular and then become unpopular. And that's probably the key difference to traditional sports, right? If you look at, a club like PSG, it is centered around football, and football will forever probably be the most popular sport in Europe. But within our region, let's say in Southeast Asia, there's a whole bunch of different games and it comes and goes, then we will be flexible and we'll pivot accordingly to what is the most popular, and we may invest and divest out of games depending on how the publisher's plans are when it comes to esports and obviously the popularity of the games within the region.
Thank you very much. I believe that those answers definitely did answer the questions. Okay, so let us move on to question number 3. What are some ways that COVID has caused esports and traditional sports to converge that might not have happened otherwise? I think I will go with this question. I'll give this question to Rodrigo.
Okay, thank you. If we can all answer that question. We have been suffering this COVID pandemic all over the world. Maybe because most sports were not always able to play and to get their tournament. There was teams tournaments, and sponsors needed to get involved in something, and there was something that was called esports, and made a lot of sense because it was not being stopped. Maybe the big championships and the big finals with LAN environments were not getting to happen because of the situation. But anyway, all the virtual and online aspect of the tournaments were being played. So I think that allowed the conversation to get more accelerated. Maybe I think it was already happening, but because esports didn't stop and it was growing, obviously sports took a notice of that and get involved in the industry. I think it's interesting to see now that the pandemic is finishing and maybe we have to see what happens. How can we keep on the relationship growing and not being like take away because of the situation that now it's getting back to normality? And getting back to the previous question, one of the two things that I wanted to add is like I would like to see how esports get into the youth audiences when it comes to competitions. I know that a lot of kids are playing esports, are playing games, but they are not playing esports. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how the professional teams and the professional leagues get involved also with the kids that already play maybe a sport and they compete in the sports in an amateur way, but they are not getting a competition when they are young because they are not allowed to. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see that kind of conversations from now on.
I could just jump on Rodrigo's point because I saw that in real time. So when the pandemic hit, we actually, in our pro league, we had an RFP process for new members, and we expected your we expected your big esports brands to kind of try and jump in and make offers to join this league. But actually, as a result of the fact that the viewership was 50% higher in 2020 than in 2019, by the fact that we beat our projections in 2020 by over 20%, we were getting applications from places, from traditional sports stakeholders that we had never anticipated and predicted would try and kind of step into esports. We had Premier League players who were looking to launch teams and brands and wanted to join our membership. We had an NFL player who said, listen, I'm not in esports now. I'm looking at esports now because of the pandemic. You guys are doing tremendously well in terms of all of your KPIs, business-wise, viewership-wise, fan-wise. How do I set up a team? How do I set up a brand and kind of jump straight in? So I think this is exactly the point Rodrigo was making, that people saw that while the pandemic was and is a horrible development to the world, in a time when traditional sports were a little bit more fallow, there was less competition going on, there was less opportunity to put on events. The stakeholders were looking and going, it's a bit quiet here. Where is it not quiet? Where is there commercial opportunities? Where there is fan engagement opportunities? And esports was there front and center. I think the challenge now, not the challenge, I think the exciting opportunity now is to take that curiosity, to take that pandemic-induced interest, and back to an original question, make it sustainable. We keep these guys, we keep these stakeholders, we keep these organizations that showed an interest, we keep them on board, we keep them interested, we keep them excited. And I think if we keep doing that, then to Ravneet's earlier point, we keep that sustainability going, and we keep these people within and nurturing and expanding our ecosystem and theirs.
Thank you. Now let us move on to the next question. Can we have the question on the screen, please? All right.
Maybe while you wait for the next question, I can just add one more point, that way we don't have any silence yet in this fantastic panel so far. Definitely the spotlight. I think that the entire traditional sports ecosystem before the pandemic saw esports as a little child running around in a playpen and throwing around sand. And with this situation, this terrible COVID situation that our entire world is facing today, the spotlight turned to that sandpit and understood that that sandpit is actually a whole planet with lots of endless opportunities and lots of engaging aspects and lots of contributing people and the depth of it. Now that we have understood, or the entire sporting community better understands what esports actually is, I think we will not see a decreased interest in the activity, in the segment, even as we come out of COVID. because esports has always been this. Yeah, there has been growth in numbers, and of course, in the next year's projections, I'm sure the numbers will not grow in the same speed or in the same quantity, but definitely the eyes of the world are open to what esports is, and definitely those eyes will stay there because esports is here, and definitely we are stronger together. That was the main slogan and hashtag of the Olympic Games, and that's the hashtag of what we are talking about today. It's we are stronger together, we have to be united, and we have to learn from one another in a respectful way in order to continue growing our community, exchange in a positive way, add value, build sustainability, and give a benefit to the entire world.
Thank you, Vlad. Now we have the last question. Considering the time, it will be the last question. So the question is, in the last virtual Olympic series, video games based on traditional sports are selected and operated. They are unlike the esports when we haven't seen so far. Can we do esports such as LOL or Overwatch, whether it's a virtual Olympics or demonstration title in the Olympic? I wonder what I have to do with that. Yeah, let's hear from Ravneet.
So again, I think it takes my mind back to a discussion that used to happen at the peak of the boom of the financial services business, and as it happened that the big bankers, investment bankers, became big buyers of art, and which really fueled contemporary art worldwide. And then between the galleries there was this big discussion that this person's an investor and this guy is a collector. And I used to keep saying that how does it matter? Anything that deepens the market, anything that broadens the market, whether it's being bought by a collector or by an investor, doesn't really matter. And to that extent, I think as long as we can define the direction of travel, even if it is not specifically esport, let's say it's some other form of gaming, casual gaming, it could be fantasy sport, it doesn't really matter. What has effectively happened is the recognition on the part of the IOC that the way the direction with the world is moving, and that we need to align with that. So even though from the point of view of a purist that may not effectively be e-sport, but the very fact that they are now recognizing that you need to get away from, not get away, but certainly in addition to traditional sport, also have digital forms of sport coming along, is the fact that there is space for the two of them, and in some ways the need to bring the two of them together. And as I mentioned in response to the question earlier, was that if you look at it from the point of view of any sport that needs to become really powerful, really have a global appeal, vibrant, big fan base, I think the commercial success of the sport becomes very critical. And if you look at it from the point of view of, let's say, anybody who's a commercial stakeholder, sponsor, broadcaster, doesn't matter. You have to think of it that, what is the audience that they want to speak with? So Alex will know this for sure, but if you look at traditional sport, over the last 10, 15 years, the average age of the audience in every traditional sport has actually gone up. The only change is really women's professional tennis, as a matter of fact. And in the last 10 years, that's the only professional sport in which the average age of the audience has come down, and even there it has come down to 55 years. Now the thing is that I'm in that age group, so I mean I feel very protective about that. But sponsors, advertisers, and broadcasters don't necessarily feel that way. They feel that this is a generation that's done there, been there, done that, been there, and you need to speak to a younger audience. Whereas if you look at the average age of a gamer, it's 24 years. So I think the wheels have been set in motion in terms of recognizing that you need to bring in digital forms of sport. Even if it is not, specifically e-sport. So I wouldn't get too caught up about that. Mindset change is for humanity the single biggest challenge whenever there is, whenever we are confronted with change. And then the second thing is that, if you look at sport federations, associations worldwide, Vlad, you of course come with a completely different mindset, I know, is, they tend to be a little protective about the turf. They tend to have a little bit of a mindset in terms of control, and that control comes from the point of view of, developing the sport, making sure that the sport evolves on certain expected lines, which according to them, conform to the guardrails that they'd like to put in place. It's changing. And I think what we saw in this Olympics was the fact that, we have now started to depart from that. Equally, in China, in the Asian Games next year, esports is a medal sport. So I think it's just a question of time before, I think the IOC looks at it differently. So I won't see it as something which is half-baked. I think, definitely that, direction of travel has now been very clearly defined. I think that's the trend for the future. And I think it is again something which will help us look at the world of sport in a slightly more holistic fashion. And I think that becomes very key for the point that Alex made, that it can't be that we have even boundaries within sport, and certain sponsors are or certain athletes or certain brands get identified with certain sport. If we can just deepen that entire pool, and if we can bring the forces together, imagine what a transformational effect it could have on the world of sport per se. And I'm not making a distinction between traditional and e-sport over here. So I see this as a very positive development. I don't necessarily see it as something where there is still a little bit of hesitancy out there. And I think this is a trend that will only gain a momentum, gain steam, and benefit each one of us.
Maybe to add to Ravneet's point, I know we're running short on time, but it's very important to add this. I think the movement with the virtual sports, the target was to reach a younger demographic. Clearly, the audience of the traditional sports is getting older each year. And we saw the inclusion of new sports in the Tokyo Games, where we had a 14-year-old skateboarding Olympic champion for the first time ever in the history that a minor was an Olympic champion. Clearly, the target is to reach that younger demographic. If the IOC, with the Olympic Virtual Series, wants to reach a younger demographic, doing pure sport digitization will not achieve the objective perfectly, including the games like were mentioned before, League of Legends, Overwatch, Rocket League, fun games. Into that will allow them to reach that objective of getting that younger demographic, not having people who love cycling cycle digitally.
Thank you. Of course, I want to hear more about the answers for the questions, but we're running out of time. So I guess this will have to conclude our today's discussion. I learned a lot, and I'm ready to go back to work and put my ideas into action. And I hope everyone else watching this discussion enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. So thank you very much again. It has been my pleasure working with everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.